The myth of traction control. Who is actually controlling whom here? We've got the answer for you in this video. Martin, today we're talking about traction control. We'll try not to drift off into the ABS system. We'll cover that in another video. Today we're only talking about traction control. Fortunately, it's true that the number of crashes with high siders on the racetrack has gone down. We can say that it has done an incredible amount for accident and injury risk on the racetrack, right?
Yes, definitely. Especially in those areas where you accelerate out of a corner, it has brought enormous advantages because you no longer have to twist the throttle quite so delicately to avoid high siders and so on. The electronics help tremendously there and contribute a lot, especially with the modern systems where you have up to a 6-axis IMU that can detect the riding condition extremely precisely. These rider aids can now be tuned very accurately. In the early days, the rider aids were there, but the control strategy was very rudimentary. Basically, they just monitored how the rear wheel speed behaved compared to the front wheel speed, checked plausibility between the two, and reduced power accordingly. In most cases, that was a very rudimentary and therefore poor control strategy, which on the one hand took away too much power in places where it should not have intervened at all, and on the other hand, sometimes too little where it was already becoming dangerous. Through the development of sensors to detect the riding condition, including lean angle, the systems have continuously moved forward, and today we have achieved a control quality that is on the one hand very safe and brings a lot of security, but on the other hand also allows a great deal of freedom and a lot of acceleration, even at lean angle, as long as the tire can provide it.
I have to jump in right there, Martin, because when we talk about traction control, if you look at our 1000 PS marketplace or at the videos or on YouTube, people are obviously looking for a motorcycle with traction control because they say, okay, traction control is an awesome feature and it makes the bike better. But for you as a racer with performance ambitions, traction control is first of all something that causes something that makes you slower, because traction control, unlike everything else we talk about in our little talk, is something that actually takes power away. In a certain riding condition, torque is reduced and that inevitably makes you slower at first. So you look at it very critically. And for you, traction control is better the less it actually intervenes. So basically, it's a chance. We pay a lot of money for something and you want it to appear as little as possible. That's kind of a funny story, right?
Yeah, indeed. The goal in my field is to tune traction control in such a way. And with the racing electronics we use, we simply have more possibilities to reach a state where it only intervenes exactly where I would manually reduce power anyway, because I feel that there is too little grip. The advantage the computer has over me is that it reacts much faster. It detects developing slip at the rear tire or the bike starting to step out much earlier than I would even perceive it. That's why these control systems do have an advantage, because they are faster and recognize these patterns more quickly, especially with the modern sensors we now have on board. They do that very well, but still traction control has to be tuned so that it does not intervene where I do not want it to. In the past, that was very often the case, and with production electronics, it still often is. Because in production bikes, you are not only thinking about racing and racetracks, but also about normal road use. And from a safety perspective, you have to stay on the safe side. That often leads to situations where power is reduced, even though it would not yet be necessary. You are not riding on slicks. Maybe you are on a harder tire in cold temperatures, on a slippery road, maybe in the wet. There you have to build in safety margins so you do not crash immediately if you grab the throttle a bit roughly. In racing, we have a very limited spectrum and a very focused area where we work with these rider aids so that they take away just that tiny bit too much, but not more, because that has to be guaranteed. Otherwise, we end up in the situation you described where power is taken away, where I do not want it, making me not faster, but actually slower. The benefit of such systems, if they are well adjusted for a good rider, is that I no longer have to hit the throttle with absolute precision in a very tiny window because the electronics help me in the background. That means I can work a bit less controlled. I do not have to focus on it as much. And over a race distance, I can hit the point more consistently. It is, of course, a difference whether I only have to ride one fast lap or complete an entire race distance, where for more than half an hour, I have to be precise all the time. There, the systems are indeed helpful. Another point is that because of the high control speed, I can also define how much slip I want at the rear tire. With that slip, I can influence tire life over a race distance. We are talking about a full race distance, not just one lap. With well-adjusted traction control, I can gain an advantage because the tire does not start spinning excessively, does not overheat, and its lifespan is extended, which brings lap time improvement over the race distance. For a single lap, for example, in qualifying, traction control is not such a big helper. There it is more about not regulating too much away. And maybe in certain situations where the bike starts to lift and I have to finally regulate it, the electronics help, especially when it gets bumpy or over a crest, to save physical effort. Because to operate the throttle precisely under full acceleration is extremely exhausting, especially when you exit a corner at lean angle. You need a lot of body tension to regulate it exactly. Often it is easier to let the computer regulate, open the throttle fully, hold on, and let it sort it out. The disadvantage is that it cannot anticipate. There are situations where the human rider is ahead of the system. Take the Pannonia ring, for example. Many of you might know the crest when you exit from the back section. The bike normally lifts there, and then there is a compression where you go down again. If I switch the control off, I know the bike will lift, but I can stay on the throttle because I see the compression coming and know I will be pushed down again anyway. The computer only sees a lifting front wheel and immediately reduces power. That makes me slower at that point, even though I could have stayed on the throttle. As a human, I can anticipate that better and carry more speed out of it than the computer can. So it is about deciding depending on the situation. With highly developed racing electronics, we can define, at this point we do this, at that point we do that. We can even tune it corner by corner. We can say, corner 3, this control intensity, corner 4, that control intensity, even gear dependent. Production electronics cannot do that, so they are designed for safety and will always regulate a bit too much somewhere. For most hobby riders, it is still an advantage. Many have experienced that they are faster in lap time with traction control. That is also because traction control is a strong psychological support on such powerful bikes. How fast a hobby rider goes on a racetrack usually depends less on the bike's capability and more on how much the rider dares to approach the limit. If I know in the back of my mind that traction control will help prevent a high-sider, I dare to open the throttle earlier. That makes them able to exit corners faster. It would also work without it, but the trust in their own abilities is not there. That is why many are indeed faster with traction control, even though at the very top level it can sometimes be a hindrance.
Okay, so the difference between pro and beginner is psychology and physics in how traction control works. I have to admit I was slower with traction control than without it because I became lazy and did not even notice that I was not sitting properly. The traction control and wheelie control kept the front wheel nicely on the ground, so I was no longer as active, I did not move forward, and I was about 2 seconds slower. It felt good in the saddle, less exhausting, less of a fight, and I settled into becoming a slower, lazier rider. But if you want to develop, you need to feel the front wheel lifting and move your weight forward. With traction control, you do not feel it because the front wheel just stays down and power is being taken away. For you, that is a no-go, Martin. In our tests at 1000 PS, you try to ride without traction control to feel what is really going on. For you, the truth is without traction control.
Exactly. You need to feel when a bike really starts to lift, how much drive you can generate, especially with the new aerodynamic packages and how strongly the wings work. If the electronics are constantly regulating, you do not notice that. I rode with BMW and deactivated the system, and you can feel the wings very clearly. Not in normal riding, but when the bike exceeds a certain wheelie angle, you suddenly get additional lift. Once you pass a certain wheelie angle, it happens abruptly, and you really have to close the throttle hard to bring it back down. That is where you massively feel the aero packages. But back to traction control, I switch it off to feel what is really happening, how much power the engine truly delivers, especially in the lower gears where on superbikes, power is often cut by 20 or 30% for safety reasons. I deactivate the aids, let the bike lift and see how much power there really is. I want to know how much pressure the engine delivers, even if the tire starts to slide slightly. You do not feel that with all the controls active. I also switch them back on in the next sessions to evaluate how well they work. To recognize where and how strongly they intervene, you need to ride without them first and then let them regulate under the same conditions. That is super interesting and has shown me over the years how close modern traction control has come to the fully open state in terms of performance. The control quality today is very high.
We have seen with some track day organizers who provide rental bikes that since traction control was introduced, the number of high-sider crashes has gone down. That was already the case from around 2009 or 2010 onward. But faster riders only really accepted it from the 2020s onward, when 6-axis IMS became widespread and control quality improved. Safety was always there, but you can still crash with a high-sider. In the end, traction control does not shift the physical limits. It only helps you not to exceed them. If you're already beyond them, it cannot save you. In what case can traction control not prevent a crash?
Even with current control possibilities, you cannot say it will help 100% in every situation. On a motorcycle, that is generally impossible because its dynamics depend on it remaining in a fundamentally stable riding condition. At the apex of a corner, when we are at the tire's limit due to centrifugal force, we cannot apply additional drive or braking force without causing a crash. A control system can only intervene when a deviation occurs. That small deviation at maximum lean angle already means the bike leaves its stable state. It happens so quickly that even if power is cut again, stability cannot be restored and a high-sider occurs. Unlike a four-wheeled car, you will never fully solve that on a motorcycle. You would need a system that anticipates. Lean angle-dependent systems help by limiting power at certain lean angles. In theory, you could define a lean angle where no power is released at all. But to define that, you would need to know the available grip, which varies enormously depending on surface, tire, temperature, and so on. A warm slick on a grippy racetrack is a completely different world from a hard tire on a cold, damp road. Modern systems do reduce power almost completely at high lean angles in high control levels. For example, in rain mode, if you open the throttle fully at lean angle on dry asphalt, you will notice there is no acceleration. Power is only released again as you lift the bike up. But even that system will never prevent every crash. You always need some deviation for regulation, and that deviation must not immediately lead to instability. When exiting a corner and lifting the bike slightly, there is some room for drift before a crash, enough for regulation. But at maximum lean angle, even with the best traction control, you cannot just snap the throttle fully open.
That is a sobering insight. Many people do not know where the limit is. Traction control does not know either. If the bike is already at 99.99% of the limit, it cannot calculate that opening the throttle by 1 more degree will push it over. It cannot look 1 second ahead.
It can only react. It cannot foresee.
And at 100.1% on a motorcycle, that is a disaster, whereas in a car you might still save it. Maybe in 10 or 20 years, systems will learn tracks and predict what might happen in the next 2 meters. But for now, not only you do not know the limit, your traction control does not know it either. Still, it has saved countless collarbones worldwide. Martin, looking back, from which model year onward were production traction control systems really good?
With the latest model generations, roughly the last 3 to 5 years, production traction control systems have reached a very good level. Because of safety factors, I still sometimes deactivate them for ultimate lap time, but you can ride extremely fast with them active. In the past, they were terrible. The first one I rode in the Superbike World Championship with 10K around 2008 was a catastrophe. The wheelie control would cut power so abruptly that the bike slammed down. then immediately released power again and it shot up. You were biting into the handlebars. It developed quickly, but really smooth interventions that still allow strong drive have only been around in the last 3 to 5 years. The latest model generations are on a very high level where you can truly ride fast with them.
Okay, folks, now it is your turn. Do you wave the flag for traction control, or is it a Mickey Mouse feature for people who cannot ride? I think most people are pro traction control by now. We would love to hear your opinion. And Martin, next we have another topic about ABS for sport riders and what the wings really do in practice. Thanks, bye, and see you next time on 1000 PS TV.